So the discussion today, as I've talked to a lot of friends, a lot of scientists, there's just this resounding theme that we're trying to solve at SWAY, which is how do we bring cures to patients faster? It's just staggering when you start to think about this. I mean, it is, on average, you're 10 to 15 years to bring a cure to a patient, 6 to 9 billion, and you have a 90% failure rate. So there's something broken in this system. So our discussion today is going to be partially about, okay, what's broken, but we're really trying to have a discussion around solutions. Because there's an economic return that we can make as investors, but at the end of the day, there's a greater societal impact that we think we can all have, which is doing that, just curing disease, and how do we do this at a faster pace. So I'm going to kind of walk through a series of topics, and the first one is really just going directly at it. When we look at clinical trials, the process just seems to take too long. So maybe I'll kind of start with you, Linda. Talk to us a little bit about, in your view, how the process runs, and then what can we be doing to make this process of drug development run faster?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've been studying brain cancer for 25 years now, and over the years, I think we've been involved in probably 2 to 3 dozen clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I have a research lab at UCLA that studies this problem biologically, and I think the problem is that we can't get it, at least in the world of academia and in the universities. We could develop. We're like incubators. We could develop IP. We have kind of targets, but in order to get that to FDA registration, that's a 10-year process, and it's a moving. It's kind of a moving endpoint. So for instance, we've had trials that there's one trial that we designed almost 15 years ago for glioblastoma, and the endpoints we're looking at progression-free survival. And back in at that time, we were looking at MRI images and two-dimensional measurements of MRI, but through that process, over the last 10 years, several things changed. The way we look at MRI scans, how we grade tumors based on that, the pathology textbooks changed. So there are new genetic markers of diseases that change. So the way we classify diseases have changed, and then there are other treatments that came along the way that kind of actually modified endpoints, in terms of how well people did. And the problem is then you take that to the FDA, and they don't allow you to change your endpoints. And, that makes sense. You don't want to change the game, while you're playing it. But the world's changing around you. And so we really can't keep up. So I think that's one problem. There needs to be a faster way to get through this. And I think in each of these components, there are silos, the universities and the NIH and the DoD, and those components, those entities are very good at funding discovery science and early phase trials. But then to get it to that next step, we really need to partner with industry. And I must say, my friends, at universities, they all have their own startup with their own IP.
There are a lot of them out there.
A lot of them out there. I mean, my son's an undergrad at Stanford, and all of them have startups and IP. But the thing is, I think what's missing is some I guess an entity that coordinates all of this, kind of looks at all these individual treatments, for instance, for a particular disease, and coordinates that. And I think one problem is that the data is not shared between one company to another. So we have a lot of these failed trials, but we never know why patients failed and why some patients succeeded, because all that data is proprietary. Hospitals have proprietary data that they don't share with each other, and the data is not structured.
Yeah, it is a good point. I'm going to give you a question on data in a second, but the good thing is we have someone from the FDA, who formerly with the FDA up here. So, it's interesting in this process. I think a number of entrepreneurs or scientists will look at the FDA and say, okay, well, what can the FDA be doing? So I'd love to hear your thoughts for the audience just about what could the FDA be doing to help this process run better?
The FDA is part of the problem. I co-led the last major reform of the FDA, and it was really pretty successful, but that was years ago. And now the FDA needs another type of reform. Not the type that I did, which was really systems and modalities. Now it's got to be a technological reform, where you have tools that help to make faster, better, cheaper decisions. FDA can take 10 years to make up its mind whether or not a drug should go on the market. If there's patients who are hurting and dying out there, that's unacceptable. If it costs, $1 billion or $2 or $3 billion to have that drug approved, that's unacceptable. The FDA is something that I care a lot about. I had a wonderful time being the COO and second in command. The people there are wonderful. They're very committed. They're very smart. The smartest people I work with at FDA are smarter than the smartest people I taught with at Harvard. Great agency, but it doesn't have the modern-day tools it needs now. That's what companies like yours or the companies you invest in will have to create. It's sort of a system of wheels within wheels. To have faster, better, cheaper, safer outcomes, you need faster, better, cheaper, safer drug products. You therefore need faster, better, cheaper manufacturers of drugs, et cetera, et cetera. There really are 4 different categories of players here. The FDA is obviously, and has been for generations, the most powerful. And they also need the most work right now to get them out of the way and get them back as part of the solution. But the universities and their hospital systems and the CROs that support those systems are also in need of a great deal of change. They're way, way, way too expensive, way, way, way too filled with worthless overhead. Waste abounds at these universities. I taught at one where I know where there's a lot of overhead that doesn't belong there. Number 3, the manufacturers themselves have got to have better strategies, high-level strategies on how to work with the FDA. I tell this to all of the boards I serve on. There are 3 things that are important about success as a pharmaceutical company, or as a medical device company, or as a technology company that supports it. One is you have to have a truly great product with a truly great need. That's only 33% of what you need, though. If you want to have a star, you also have to have a great team of executives, a great board, and great advisors around that team. That's the other 33%. And the last 33% is you have to have a great ongoing relationship with the FDA. If you're missing any of those legs of the stool, it collapses. And I've been involved in tons of companies. I can tell you that for a fact. So we need to take FDA to the next level with technological tools, AI tools primarily. I have ideas for what each of those tools should be. I actually invented a couple of the tools years ago. They weren't successful then. I hope they might be successful now. I always like to think my ideas were too early for the technology. My wife says, no,
been there.
You were too early for something else, John. We need to look at this so it's a systems approach, identification of technologies that will help build the system, build the forward progress, and help not just to reduce costs, which I like that there, but that's not enough. You've got to jam down the costs and jam up the productivity, and even more than that, jam up the ability of the software's decision-making products to have lower false positives and lower false negatives, and to be very reliable. We're talking about people's lives. It has to be very reliable, or we can't rely on it at all.
No, very, very good points. And, I think there's this common theme that I hear from you. We've heard it through a lot of the panels. It has to do with data. And I think data in healthcare, is just as relevant in any other sector. So I'm going to toss it over to you two. When we were talking about this kind of in our prep meetings, the idea of data kept on coming up. And I think the question is, what can we be doing, or what solutions are out there that we can apply to data, trying to speed up this process, getting cures to people faster? Maybe start with you and then hand it to you, Dan.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to address that. So, I think one of the challenges is where does the data live in the healthcare system and who has access to it? So I work at Seattle Children's Hospital. We try to do this thing around natural language processing to come in and interface with EMR. They're so worried about that data and data breach with HIPAA. It was really challenging even to come in and pilot what was a very simple idea. And so who owns that data is the other piece of this, right? So you go to the hospital, you are seen, you have an MRI, you have all these laboratory tests. You can get a glimpse of that data, but that data is actually owned really by the hospital, and they're very scared to release it. So that limits a lot of the innovation. So when Linda's doing these multi-center trials, the ability to get that data and to go very deeply into that data has been challenged. And so I think there's immense opportunities in this space. And when I hear about all the stories earlier today about the technology and how quickly they're able to move software forward and start to go into these markets, it's really hard in the healthcare space because we're very risk averse. And if you go to a CIO of a hospital and you say, I've got this new thing I want to try and deploy, we think it's going to do something to benefit your patients, they're very resistant to that stuff. They're very scared of that. But I think it also creates a huge opportunity. So as some of your portfolio companies looking at are doing NLP, trying to extract what is an immense amount of data that's in a very archaic form. So I still dictate my operative note, I still dictate my clinic note, it goes to text. So there's an immense amount of rich data there that would, in a clinical trial, requires an individual to sit and go through that and extract that information. So there's bundles and bundles and terabytes of data that are sitting there. And then the other thing I'll mention is it's really a monopoly right now. We have Epic and we have Cerner. And for everybody in the audience who knows that, they basically have a complete monopoly on the electronic medical record. And so if you want to access or develop some brilliant application, but you need that data source, you have to go through them and they gatekeep that like crazy. So there's a huge opportunity. I've always been hoping that the Googles of the world buy out one of those guys. And I heard about open source earlier. It would be the best thing that ever happened in healthcare if somebody came in and open sourced EMR, where you could de-identify that data, but pull out all that structured and unstructured data and start to work with that. It would advance the science of what we're doing at light speed. So there's immense opportunities. I'm super excited about what can happen in healthcare, but there's a lot of challenges that are very unique to our space.
Daniel, how about from your end?
So for me,
nice bow tie, by the way.
Thank you. Kentucky style.
Very proud of you.
Thank you. So I'll take a little bit of more of a challenge in the industry. I look at it not the way that I want it to be, but the way that it actually is. And if I start there, I'm able to get rid of what I hope to be the scenario that I live in. And what I want teams to do is start pressing the edges, pressing the FDA in a respectable way, but pressing what they do, because right now, typically when you go to biopharma companies that are exceptional and forward-facing, and they're on the edge, they're developing new CRISPR technologies or name the current buzzword in biopharma, and you ask, well, what are you doing to improve the rate of bringing drugs from discovery into clinical trials and then from clinical trials through approval? And the answer typically is, well, we've got a great group of key opinion leaders that we're working with. And frankly, that's not good enough. And I come from this space originally as an academic scientist. And I think we need to get real instead of Instead of saying, I wish this were this way, we need to start experimenting. We need more technologists to be involved. I agree with you about, I think the advent of Google and Amazon and Apple entering the market is starting to shake the trees in this market. And clinicians and scientists are starting to wake up and realize what I was doing yesterday, the way I was going about it, is not good enough today. And so I think it starts with that change in perspective. And then once we have that, we can start marching forward and get serious about implementing things. Because people say, this tech isn't going to work. Well, I guarantee if we do nothing, then nothing will change.
Yep. Fair point. Well, I've got a few more questions, but I want to open it up to the audience so we can get the mics ready. Just see if there's some questions. I think Chris in the back. I'm a little blinded, but I think that's you. Hold on one second. I think
It strikes me on the data that the first place is for the patients to have ownership of their data and be able to release it. I would love to be able to take every bit of data about me, depersonalize it, and put it into all your hands every time we do anything. And have every patient be able to demand that happens with their data. And that's an action beyond the gatekeepers.
Yeah, I've been very interested in this idea of a universal health passport, right? So, as an example, I had a very, high-level Microsoft employee. Their kid had a brain tumor. They want to get a second opinion. I don't have a way to take that record, their imaging, really send it anywhere. So we burned a CD and FedExed it. Now it's like a year and a half ago. It's absurd, right? Like, just ridiculous. So technology is way beyond where we're at, but you don't own that record. The hospital doesn't want to give it to you because they're competing with that hospital next door, and they're scared to death that you're going to take that information and you're going to take it somewhere else. So you're a captive audience there. So if you look at like the EMR, for example, the VA probably has one of the best systems in the country because everybody's under the same system. So you go to VA in Albuquerque, you go to VA in Seattle, you can see your records. It's totally portable back and forth. So I always look at the VA as like the worst example of healthcare in the United States. But yet, if I go to Seattle Children's and you bring your kid to me, I can't share that information with Linda in a very easy, effective way. So, like even the residents right now, we text, which is against all the HIPAA, but do you guys do that too?
Yeah, but it happens.
So I'm on call, the guys text me a picture of that kid's MRI with the brain tumor, and then we make a determination what we're going to do back and forth, but that's actually... I shouldn't even be saying this, because that's breaking 4,000 HIPAA rules doing that. But that's the way we work. But then the healthcare system it hasn't caught up yet. So we're not able to really enable these technologies within our workspace effectively. And it's largely because the ownership of the data that hasn't been figured out yet. And I bought it, I should own it, but I don't.
That isn't really the biggest problem at all. The biggest problem is we have tons of data. We can't do much with it. It's either in a format that's unusable, or it's in free text that we just can't pull the knowledge out of to use it. So we've got billions upon billions of data points, but we can't use them very well.
And they're locked in different systems.
So locked in different systems. They're locked in different formats. And I've worked probably 20 years on this problem. I just still didn't succeed. What we call free narrative text processing. They now call it different words, but to pull the knowledge out of the text of a medical record. Very hard to do because you need to pull it out of literally millions of records sometimes to get what's valuable out of it. And I would just say that would be the number one invention of the decade. We could invent that product. It would make an incredible difference in terms of speeding up review of products, both in the U.S. and worldwide, coming up with faster, better, cheaper decisions by the FDA, and also, very important, companies to cut costs need to fail early. They're going to fail, they need to fail early. So one of the things that I would like to see, we put in place what's called a pre-sub meeting with the FDA before you submit to get feedback from the FDA on how you ought to submit. I'd like to make it more of a stage-wise process, so maybe you get 10 chances along the way to get real good feedback from the FDA. And therefore, one of the critical questions should always be when the company goes in for that advice, are we likely to pass the next after step? If we're not, we really are smarter to not throw good money after bad. That could cut enormously from the drug development costs in this country. Last year, the FDA, I think, approved 54 new molecular entities for drugs. Of them, only 2 were major products, and those 2 had a commercial value, I think, of around $45 billion. Now, you think that's a lot of money, but for an agency that spends a fortune and tons of time to produce just $54 billion worth of value, or $45 billion for the value for the country, that's absurd. It needs to do at least double that. And why do everybody says, well, you don't want FDA to get into commercial issues. Baloney. How do patients and doctors value a product? They vote with their dollars. They vote with their feet. That's an important measure of whether that product is really a viable product and worthwhile. There are other measures too, but that's an important one. And we need FDA to be more cognizant of that. We need FDA to help companies make decisions early about going forward or not going forward. Failing early is very important.
Yep, very, very good point. Anything to add, Linda? You want to go to the next question?
Well, just briefly in terms of data, I think, when I went to medical school, there was no electronic medical record, so we were taught to dictate and to write these elaborate text descriptions of our kind of analysis of patients. But I think the medical students going to school today are operating in a different era, but we haven't changed like how they dictate their operative notes, and so I think there's an opportunity to be able to collect this data better if we could actually have systems that kind of maybe have pull-down menus or something where actually the important data is collected and able to be...
We were talking about this earlier. How do you collect data in your lab?
Excel files.
Excel files, right? That's a business opportunity. Anytime I hear that, I'm like, it ends up in Excel. There's a business to be had there.
Right.
We'll go back to the audience. Any more questions? Go ahead.
Sorry, I've lost my voice, so I hope I'm audible. So, question about privacy. The other side of privacy is the insurance question and how you price risk. So, in a world where you can, let's say hypothetically, we're able to unify all data sets, and then you've got clinical data and genotypic data in one single unified data set, does that necessarily lead us to universal healthcare with a single payer? Because you can't actually stop identification when you've got that much data in a single file. You can always essentially figure out who that patient is. And the risk then is that where's the Chinese wall between the clinical data and then how you price risk?
I'm not taking that.
I would only say that I think the two are completely disconnected. Universal healthcare does not flow from having privacy breached. That's just a separate issue. Privacy should never be breached. And we should be able to quantify data in a format that allows us to use it. I don't know if any of you have joined Ancestry.com in here or one of those. I just did a couple of weeks ago. I found out some very interesting things about myself. I'm 30% French and I never knew it. Okay? Your data can be valuable, as mine is now in that system, to others. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the system has to know who I am. In this case, it does, but it could in a hospital system not. That does not lead to universal health care. It doesn't. They're not connected.
I'm going to answer your question a different way. So, if I know that you are likely to get cancer because I've studied your biome and I know all your genetics and I know your family history and we have all that data that we're talking about that's not accessible, and now magically we have that. And I know you are going to get cancer when you're 50. So what happens? And it's an important and unsolved ethical question, but I will take the positive side of this and say, if I know you're at risk for these things, there are things that I can do earlier to maybe mitigate your risk. So as an insurer, I actually probably want to know that because I may intervene or try to help and intervene with you. And so I think a lot of this is going to, in Seattle, there's multiple companies trying to get your poop and get your saliva and all this stuff and figure out your biome and then match that to your genetics and then your family history and all this
Paid
stuff.
for by the insurance companies in an ideal way.
Yeah. So I do think it's probably going there on some level, and we haven't, as a society, quite figured that out. But again, accountable care and all of these different things. If you can't be dropped because we know you're 20 and you get 50, you're going to develop some type of cancer. But maybe we can intervene, and maybe Linda comes up with solutions for how to address that. I think that's where we ultimately go with this.
Well, we got the time limit sign, which means you all get to go run to a bar after Brian and I give some closing comments. So I'm going to give you and Daniel, Linda, give you a chance to answer a question. You can start one company today, but what's the quick elevator pitch on what it is? And I'll go to Daniel first to give you some time to think about it. I'd like to put him on the spot.
No, thank you. So to echo what John said, it's you want to be quick to fail, right? And so the key here is that we know multiple receptors and we have multiple platforms to develop multiple drugs, but there is a wide disconnect that too many drugs that are false positives are getting into clinical trials and making it into the mid-stage. So what we really need is we need artificial intelligence that can stitch together synthetic tissue systems, synthetic biology to piece together to better project and cut off the fat earlier for companies. It's clear that the problem here is a bulk that happens up front, and so failure is catastrophic. So to me, what we're talking about is it's synthetic bio. We're talking about synthetic chemistry that is leading to artificial-based and machine learning engines that allow us to better predict failure based on safety reasons and also tying to indications better that are beyond what we're doing today, that are very simple with saying, hey, this binds to a receptor and this receptor is active in a cell culture in this disease.
I'd like to say I'm just glad you're on our team. Thank you. Linda, I hope you'll join us soon.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, and I guess I think if there are a lot of companies I think that are needed, but I think if it's just one company, I think one company that kind of can integrate the whole process would kind of be the company, because listening to some of the talks earlier, there's so much going on in AI and data management and software systems that I just kind of feel like within healthcare we're really lacking in a lot of these things, and it's because each component of it there are software solutions for each component, but there's not one that kind of allows taking in terms of discovery of new drugs, taking something that's discovered in the lab and speeding that process all the way through to FDA registration. Similarly, as a physician, the process that integrates the insurance, because the payers, make a difference here, especially when we get down to the level of personalized medicine. No one's going to enter a market when each treatment only treats smaller and smaller populations. So a way to kind of, I guess, figure that out and figure the wins earlier, I think, is kind of the company that should happen. How to do that, I don't know.
Great. Well, thank you all for your time. I think the audience agrees. You're a great panel, so thank you all.